Hello everybody and welcome to another chatty video. This is one of those videos that you put on in the background while you get ready in the morning or you clean your room or something. Today I'm going to be talking about competitive reading. Has reading become too competitive? Have we somehow, accidentally, made it a sport? This is kind of a feed on from another video I made earlier this year. Actually, I can check when I did it. It was in October. Oh my god, it was October last year. I thought it was this year. No, it was a whole year ago. I made a video called Not a Proper Reader. And I really enjoyed making that video because it was like this confessional. It was talking about how I don't feel like a proper reader because I don't think I read as much as everyone else is reading. I don't feel like it's the only thing I want to be doing. I have other hobbies. And you guys responded really well to that video. Like, so many of you people agreed and kind of were like, yes, these things needed to get off my chest. And so this kind of thought process doesn't stop once I make a video, you know, like I made that video and then I kept thinking about it still. And so another kind of angle I've been thinking about lately is the competitive nature of reading. And years ago in 2012, you see all my videos are they're melding together. Years and years ago, I made a video talking about how I hate reading challenges. And what I mean by that, because there's now, at the time, there was only one reading challenge. It was the 50 book challenge, and that's what everyone tried to do. Now the idea of a reading challenge has totally changed. Like, there are Bookstagram challenges, there are like readathons, which didn't exist back then on Booktube. So what I was talking about then was this idea of everyone like deciding at the beginning of the year, I'm gonna read next number of books, 50 books, 100 books. And then the goal, the imperative becomes to read that number of books. It doesn't become to read. It doesn't matter like if the books are good or not. Or one thing I often see that I think is really interesting, I'm not judging people when I see it, I just find it like fascinating. At the end of the year, I see so many people like making to be read videos and they're like, oh, I'm trying to read a bunch of short books, graphic novels, poetry collections to try and catch up on my reading challenge. And I'm like, just read the ones you want to read, whatever you want to read. Like, don't feel don't feel attacked by it. And recently, I swear, my favorite Booktube channel right now is Mercedes's channel. I just mentioned her in my last video and I'm mentioning her again because she made a video that was about like falling out of love with reading. And in that video, she talked a lot about kind of the impact that Booktube has had on her reading, and she just did a follow-up to that video, and it made me think about this more. And in my last video last week, I talked about competitive reading, so let's just jump into it. Enough of this preamble, I don't even know what I'm talking about. So reading, when I think about it outside of Booktube, like if I pretend that Booktube never existed, it's not a thing, no one knows about it, which for a lot of people, they don't know about it, right? But let's pretend it doesn't exist. Reading is a very solitary thing in my head. Yes, absolutely, in a way, it's like a huge connector of people. We're all reading the same books, in a way, right? Like, there is only an X number of books that we get to pick from that get published. So we all walk into a bookshop, assuming like within countries and what gets translated. I know I'm making a generality here, okay? I know. Don't get finicky on me. So like, I know, but generally, like we're all reading from the same books. And it is a great communicator, a great connector. But apart from the fact that we're sharing ideas in that way, it's a very solitary thing, you know? You go to the bookshop usually on your own and you browse, or the library, you go and you just like picking out a book, maybe on an e-reader, you pick a book, you buy, borrow, or lend it, and then you go home and you read it on your own. Of course, there are exceptions, right? Reading books to your kids, reading a book with your partner, etc., etc. But let's just admit that for the most part, it is a solitary experience. when before Booktube, it remained a solitary experience afterwards as well. I would often tell my mom about the book, and I've told this story many times on Booktube, but like, it got to a point where I would like read a book, have to tell my mom the entire plot of the book, which would take me like an hour, and then tell her my thoughts on the book so that we were on the same page, right? And that was fine, like, but it was a lonely kind of thing, and I didn't mind. It was totally fine. But then Booktube and similar communities like Bookstagram and book blogging, but I'll just talk about Booktube because that's what I know. They make them these community events. Suddenly reading isn't lonely at all. Like, it's the opposite of lonely. I make a video about a book, thousands of people see it and talk to me about it, and if they've read it, they tell me what they thought. And it went from being a solitary thing to a community thing. And there's so many positives to that, but there's also negatives, right? And I think one of the negatives is that it has become a competitive sport. So here's my thesis. That by nature, by just the nature of being a part of a community that revolves around an object, in this case books, you start to compare and contrast your interaction with the object with other people's interaction of the object. And so if we're talking about books and we all are subscribed to a bunch of booktubers and you start watching their channels and seeing how much they read, you suddenly feel like that's how much you're supposed to read. Or yeah, you read 5 books last year and you thought that was great. That's the most you've ever read. And then you go and watch some people's channel and they're like, I had a really bad reading month. I only read 6 books. And you're like, what? I think it does become like a sport, sort of. It does, there's like teams of different types of reading and different genres of reading. And we have this kind of, for me, the biggest thing is the scoring. It's like getting a goal every time you finish a book, and it becomes more about scoring the goal than it is about the journey. It becomes more about ticking off that number. How many books did I read this year? As opposed to, I read really good books this year, etc., etc. One thing that I think about often is like, what would have happened if I'd never joined Booktube? And I don't say that because I don't want to be a part of, I love Booktube, but everyone thinks these things, right? You always think about the alternatives in life. What would have happened? And I think that my reading would be totally different. I've made videos about this in the past, and Mercedes recently talked about this too. In this video that I did in October 2016, I called myself a public reader. And I think that that's a really apt term for what we're doing on Booktube, because we've taken this personal solitary experience and decided to share it outside of our confines. And what it does is it makes it a performance, right? It creates there's a performativity that comes along with sharing everything you do in a certain activity. It does not mean that it's fake. There's performativity in everything you do. Just like by leaving your house, you're suddenly performing. But like in a specific community, it suddenly does become a bit of a show. And for the most part, I don't mind. I love it. That's why I'm still here. If I did hate it, I would have left. But I love it. So I'm here, and I love seeing what books other people are getting. I love seeing the books that my friends love. This is like one of my favorite things. When a booktuber that I really love makes a video or an Instagram post and says that they just read a new favorite book, it fills me with such excitement. I can't even explain. Like, it's kind of bizarre. Like, why do I care what other people's reading? But I do. Recently, my friend Max from Well Done Books, who has a fantastic Instagram, I'll link him down below, he just finished a book, what was it called? The Nightingale? I think it's called The Nightingale. And he loved it. And I was literally so happy about it. So happy that I remember this, you know? I love that it's a community event. But with the scoring of how well you're doing. How many pages have you read this year? How many books have you read this month? I think it does become a bit competitive. One thing for me that I've really noticed, there's lots of it's not, the sports metaphor. It can only go so far. It can only take me so far. But there's different mini games within it. And one of those things that I struggle with is this competition to be relevant in what you're reading. Does anyone else feel this? I'd really love to hear if other people feel this. When I started Booktube, I basically became aware of so many books. I used to just go to the bookshop, look around, find a book or 2 or 3, go home, read those books, and then that was it. I didn't really learn about other books other than going to the bookshop. And now, once I joined this community and everyone's talking about all of these books, and being a part of the community and searching out new books, there's now book buzz, book hype, and certain books become more popular than others, which is natural. And I feel like I have to read them. I have to read them, or I'm a bad person, or I'm not a proper reader, or I'm not competing well enough in the environment. A couple examples of this are When Dimple Met Rishi by Sanjay Menon and The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. These are books that I genuinely, I'm being honest with you. I'm opening an honest channel here. I genuinely feel bad that I haven't read them. Not because I particularly want to read them, not particularly because of anything other than I feel like it's making me look bad that I haven't read them, because my community has read them for the most part. And I was so excited about When Dimple Met Rishi. Super pumped. I probably should have brought it down. It's up there somewhere. I was really excited about it, and I read 150-ish pages of it or something, and I wasn't liking it. That's just honest. I just wasn't enjoying it. It wasn't what I wanted it to be. It wasn't something I was enjoying for what it was. And before Booktube, I would have just been like, what a shame, and returned it to the library, or given it to a friend, or just left it on my shelf. I would have moved on. But because I'm in Booktube, I feel like, no, everyone's talking about this book. Everyone loves this book. I need to finish it. The Hate You Give is a similar example, but with a different kind of set of expectations. It is a book I definitely want to finish. I do want to read, but I started reading it, and then stuff happened. I went traveling and I couldn't take it with me, and so I was like, okay, I'll read it when I come back home. And by the time I came back home, I kind of felt like, I need to restart it, and so it just got interrupted. That's not a big deal for me. Before Booktube, I would have just been like, okay, I'll restart it in a few months, or I'll pick it back up. There was no race to a finish. There was no, oh god, there's this competitive edge that if I don't read it now, I'm not relevant anymore. I won't be on top of it anymore. And I still want to read it. I still want to finish it, but I feel like because I haven't read it fast enough in the year that it came out, in the months after it came out, I'm not good enough. And those are some of the negative effects from it becoming a competitive sport. And so I guess the solution to it, right? Oh god, if we talk about problems, we have to talk about solutions. I guess the solution to it is just deciding not to play into that dialogue. But it's really hard. I find it really hard when I watch wrap up after wrap up of people being like, I only read 7 books this month, and I only read 1 because of school, or because of life, or because I have other hobbies. And I'm like, oh my god, I'm not doing good enough. I'm not doing good enough in the sport I didn't want to compete in. You know what I mean? I find that really interesting. For me, the benefits of Booktube outweigh the negative, obviously. But I still think these are productive things to think about and talk about, because they do affect the ways that we read. If this is our passion, I find it super interesting to talk about the ways that it's being affected. Competitive reading. There was definitely another angle I wanted to take on it. One thing that I do think is really interesting is how do I phrase this? I've seen on Instagram. Okay, yeah, this is cool. I want to talk about this. So I saw on Instagram. I follow a lot of Bookstagram accounts because I love Bookstagram. I don't do it myself. because my Instagram account is just personal photos of me. Huh. But I do a lot of book mail unboxings on my Insta story, if you're interested in that. Little plug. But I really follow a lot of Instagram accounts, Bookstagram. I really enjoy them. And one thing I saw recently was super interesting. I saw this person who said, I'm rereading this book. I know I shouldn't be, because I have so many books I should be reading. Now, she did not mean school. Like, she didn't mean that she should be reading for school or something. She meant that there was new books that were more pressing. There was, like, for me, I just read a lot into it, you know? And I kind of felt like what she was saying, and I could be wrong, but, like, I get this sentiment a lot, not just on this person, but, like, everywhere. There's this sentiment, like, I shouldn't be spending my time rereading books. I shouldn't be spending my time taking breaks from reading. I shouldn't blah, 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 because I should be staying on top of the current trends, reading as much as I possibly can, and making sure that I hit these goals before the end of the month or year. And it's like, whoa, when did we all decide that we wanted to get into this kind of competitive thing? Because that's not the kind of reading I like. It's not. I love rereading books. I've talked about this a million times on my channel, I swear. Before Booktube, okay? There's such a divide. Like, I genuinely tell everyone this. I'm always like, okay, well, before Booktube and then after Booktube, there's like a split in my life. 16-year-old me didn't know she was making a huge decision, but she was. Before Booktube, at least half of my reading was rereading. I loved rereading books, adored it, because for me, that's the point of reading. Like, what are we... It goes down to every single person on this one, right? Like, I can only talk to my own experience. It goes down to every one of us. Why do you read? Christ. Oh, it's gotten spicy in here. Why do you read? Because I read to find favorite books that speak to me that I can then revisit. I don't want to read a new book every time. I want to go back. Like, that's why we're digging, right? I feel like when we read, we're digging for gems. When we finally find a gem, we don't just go, that was great, and chuck it into the dirt pile again. No, we put it aside to revisit. That's how I feel about it. And after Booktube, I have not done that as much. Like, I've done it a bit because I've, like, literally tricked myself into doing it. At a certain point, I made a rule that I start the year off with a reread, because it was like the only way that I would do it. Trying to trick myself by making it a challenge on Booktubeathon, by doing this, by doing that, like tricking myself into rereading because I know I love it. But the pressure of the competition that gets built around reading stops me from doing it. I don't do it. I keep thinking I could reread Animal Farm for the 7th time, or I should probably read that book that I haven't gotten to yet, and I'm like not going to be on top of it anymore. I'm not relevant anymore. I think the problem, not the problem, a problem, or a thought to consider, is the medium of reading itself. So, if we were talking about music or movies, totally different conversation. Because and I don't want to like quantify numbers. First of all, I don't think I could properly do it. And second of all, I don't think it's useful. But like, if we say a kind of fast reader is reading around 50 books a year. Let's just say that number just so that we can have a number. But I really think it's arbitrary. If, like, a person who's really devoting a lot of time to reading is reading 50 books a year, how many movies can you watch in a year? Like, how many movies does an average person watch in a year? You could watch so many. How many times have you just, like, watched 2 movies in a night? I do that often, because it's not that hard, right? I love movies. I'm not saying that they're not hard to make, and I'm not saying that they're not like complex to enjoy. Not at all. I'm just saying, like, literally time-wise, if we just look at the time, 2.5 hours. Imagine if you could read every single book in 2.5 hours. What a dream. That's a dream world to me. But anyway, like, it becomes completely different, because in the movie realm, you can watch all the new popular movies if you really want to, if that's what's important to you to stay relevant. You feel like you need to go watch these movies. It's not that much of a time suck. You're like, okay, I'll just spend one day a week catching up on popular movies. Great, you're covered. But in reading, it doesn't work like that. Like, some people will read 20, like, last year I read 26 books, I think. 24? I forget. I completely forget. But, like, I read something in the 20s. There's, like, 20 relevant books. You know what I mean? Like, if I was trying to stay on trend, I could have just read the 20 most popular books that year, and that's all I read. I wouldn't have had time to read my own books, like the things that interest me, the random things that interest me, my school books. That's another whole factor. Let's chase that for a second. Like, having this whole competitive reading thing completely disregards the idea that some years are different than others. For example, I'm currently doing my master's. I have no time for reading. Like, no time. I have no time for reading. And if you've just given birth to a child, you're not going to have any time for reading. Or maybe you will, because you're a special case. Like, maybe you find it a great part of, like, I don't know, being a new parent. I don't know what I'm talking about anymore. But, like, somebody else might be like, no, personally, I wasn't able to juggle reading and being a new parent. You might not be able to juggle reading and being a student, or reading and doing a new job, or reading and moving. Like, all of these things can impact people a lot. And once we start to put these pressures on ourselves, we start to make each year seem like it's a reset and it's going to be the same as last year. You should be able to read the same amount of books every year. That doesn't make any sense. Every year is very different. I think about that sometimes. One thing that I've often seen people talk about, and I think right now there's a bit of a conversation going on about it in Booktube, is Goodreads, the impact of Goodreads. I love Goodreads. Before, I wish I'd had Goodreads my entire life, because it's like a dream for cataloging books. I know, like, I can see exactly what I read in 2016, 2015, 14, 13, 12, you know, over the 6 years that I've been doing this, more than 6 now, like, I can see every book I've read in a little, maybe just a sentence, or maybe just a few stars, or maybe a whole review of my thoughts. I love that. So for me, Goodreads is not a part of my problem with this sort of thing, but the challenge is the, like, 50 books reading challenge thingy. And you know what's funny? You know, I'm such a hypocrite. You gotta admit these things to yourself sometimes. Like, I, every year, set my reading challenge to 1, because I just want to read. You know, it's kind of, I like clicking on that button on my Goodreads profile so that I can see the books that I read. So that's why I don't put 0 or something. But I just, 1 book. That's all I want. I just want to read. Like, I just care about reading. But I mentioned that I'm a hypocrite because literally I was thinking before, I was like, should I set my challenge to 100 in 2019? Forward planning here. 2018, I'm doing my master's all the way until August, so I'm like, okay, well, I won't be able to read that much. But then 2019, I really want to get back into reading. Maybe I should set it to 100, and that could be my whole point of my year. And I'm like, Ariel, you're falling into this trap. Ariel, you don't care how much you read. You just care that you're spending time reading. And reading your favorite books and finding new favorite books. You know, one problem I have, and I've also talked about this in another video, is that I used to read a lot of young adult, and now I do. I read like 50% of my reading is young adult. That's still a lot of young adult, but I read other things. And first of all, negatively affected the channel, that's for sure. The people, they aren't watching as much anymore. But secondly, apart from that whole crisis, it's not as trendy, you know, like, especially on Booktube. Like, if I'm like, I would like to read this nonfiction book about Frida Kahlo, no one's like, yeah, I can't wait. People are like, okay, you do that. And it's really funny because, like, I did on Goodreads, I did, like, an update on I'm reading Turtles All the Way Down. Boom! Hundreds of likes. And then I'll, like, update on one of my school books, and people are like, 2 likes. 3 likes. Or I'll update on a random nonfiction book or an adult book, and it's just like 20 likes. And like, it makes me not want to read the things I want to read, because I know that my audience doesn't want me to read it. I think we're branching into a new topic. Should we just do weekly rants? Because this is fun for me. I would love to hear your thoughts on this kind of stuff, because I find it super fascinating. This has been a crazy long video, and I genuinely have to go do homework now. So, gotta try and read a novel tonight. Probably not gonna happen, but I'm gonna try my best. Okay, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!